Hello, and welcome to the fourth and last episode in our series on building a custom app in Make.com from scratch, featuring Gavel, an automation platform. In this episode, we're going to build our last modules for downloading the documents once the form is fully filled out. We'll also cover webhooks, which will receive events once, again, a form is completed, and be able to both pass the data and the actual finished documents, generated documents. And finally, I will briefly touch on how you can publish the app on the community marketplace so that other users can enjoy it as well. Let's get cracking. Let's get cracking with downloading documents from Gavel once we have already created the session. For these, we have these two last endpoints in the API documentation. One is for retrieving the document metadata. Essentially, what it takes in is the workflow name and then also the session ID. And as a response, we get the list of all the documents. This will only be visible once all the fields in the form have been filled out, either by us through the API or by the user. And for each document, we'll have the format, we'll have the name, the template, and also then the URL where we'll be able to download it. Now, the next endpoint is this download document, which takes as input essentially the URL that we get from this download document metadata endpoint. And as a result, we get the binary file contents, right? Which we can then upload to another service, such as, for example, Google Drive, send an email, etc., etc. All right, so let's get cracking with our first endpoint, so retrieve document metadata from an existing session. Let's create a new module. It will be a search, because what we are going to do here is, considering we have multiple documents over here, we really would want to output them in bundles, so that then as well the user can, for example, add the download document and then download each document sequentially. So that's why we're going for search, as it will be output multiple bundles. The connection will be the API key, the name, let's call it list documents from session, and then the label will be list documents from an existing session. And lists all documents from an existing session. Note, these will only be available once all the form fields have been filled out. Click Save. All right, as the URL, we'll have the following. Just copy paste. The workflow name, as in previous modules, will be a parameter, parameters dot workflow name. Then session as well will be a parameter. The method will be get. Indeed, get. No headers, no query parameters. And then in terms of the response, we don't really have pagination, so we don't need this limit. The iteration will be based, as you can see, there is this documents field over here, key. So it will be body.documents, and then the output will be the whole item. So let's click Save Changes. And then in the mappable parameters, let's actually copy the configuration we get, for example, from getFlow workflow information, considering it will be very similar. I'm not sure if it needs the .yaml at the end, but we'll test it out. All right, so workflow name, list workflow names, required true. And then we'll also have another one, which will be the session ID. The session ID. This will be simply a text. Label will be the session ID. Required true, and we'll also add a help text saying these can be retrieved from the output of the, let's see how it's called, create workflow session with data module, right? Because as the output we are getting the session ID. Click save changes. For now, interface will keep empty, and let's just test this out if this works. Let's go to our app test scenario. We have already this create workflow session with data module. Let's now make sure that all the fields are filled out. Skip review page is yes. And then let's add this new module over here. So list documents from an existing session. The workflow name, all fields form. And then session ID, let's run this once. It took quite a while, but we got the session ID. Let's now put it here. All fields form, session ID is this. And let's run this. Okay, so this is not working, most likely because of the .yaml at the end. So let's go back, and in the parameters workflow name, we're gonna do replace .yaml with nothing. Click save changes. We don't have to refresh because it's just communications tab that we updated. Let's run this again. Okay, now it works fine. And as you can see, we get these two documents over here. Let's now set up the interface. For that, we can actually use the generator. So if we go over here in options, generator, JSON, and then we put this. We don't need the lengths and indexes. That's because they make specific bundle information. But click generate, and it will generate the specification for you. So format, name, template, type, URL. The type of the URL will obviously be URL. And then the rest is text. Click save changes. Let's just save this and refresh. Let's run this again. And as you can see, we get the two bundles and we get the output properly formatted as well. Only one small change I want to make is just make sure that this URL is capitalized. All right, so we have implemented this retrieve document metadata. The only thing left now is implemented this download document, which will take again as input the URL from that's coming from here, and give us in response the binary file contents. Let's implement it. So create new module. This will be an action. The module action will be read. The name, let's call it download document. Download document. Download the contents of the document. Note, you will need the download URL provided by the list documents from an existing session module. Click save. The one thing as well that I think we can do is in the list documents from an existing session, just to make it a bit more clear, let's call this URL download URL, just so it's a bit more clear for the users. All right. In terms of our mappable parameters, the only thing that we need is actually the URL that we get again from here. It's already pre-built. So for this purpose, in the mappable parameters in the download document, we'll define name URL, type will be URL, label will be download URL, required true, and let's also add a help over here, and download URL provided by the list documents from an existing session module. Click Save Changes. Let's go to our Communications tab. No headers, no query parameters. The response will be just the body, which I believe will just be directly the contents of the binary contents, but let's test it and see, so we can define the interface. In terms of the URL, we will be passing the parameters URL. The only issue here is that, as you can see, we also have this domain name as well, while what we need to define over here is just this part after .io, so /API/document blah blah blah, right? So we just need this part. So how do we remove this first part over here? As you can remember, we have defined actually this domain inside of our connection. So this connection.domain Gavel.io, as we can see, for example, in our base of the app. So essentially what we need to do is just remove this part, right? Which is what will be dynamic. And what we can do simply is replace parameters URL, and in here we're putting the connection domain.gavel.io. Actually, I think we'll probably need to combine them, concatenate them somehow. I think we can do like this. Let's test it out. And then should be replaced then by just nothing, right? Or replacing it with nothing. Click Save Changes. Let's test if this works or not. For this, save and then refresh as we just defined the module. Let's open up our inspector as well to see to what URL the request will be made. Let's again get the URLs from our session. Let's get the PDF file and download a document, download URL. Okay, I think as well the issue we now have is with validation, because it's expecting an HTTPS over here. That's all fine. What we can simply do is go back to mappable parameters and just put this type here, text. This will mean there's no validation for HTTPS. Click Save Changes and just reload. Okay, let's try again. Click OK. Okay, that all works fine. Run this module. Right, we got some error. Invalid AST. Probably because the URL is not being formatted properly. Actually, just had another idea. Instead of trying to replace it like this, what we can also do is simply split the parameters URL by this .gavel.io. So essentially what will give us then is an array with the first item being our domain and the second item being everything after gavel.io, and what we do is we simply take the last we take the last element in that array. So let's test this out. On this module, okay, seems to be working. Nope. Invalid module output, expected object but found. Okay, but the request has been executed properly, as you can see over here. It has been formatted properly, so that's good. And then the response body, we just got the buffer. And the issue is the modules in make accept like a JSON output. Instead, we just got the buffer directly, so it doesn't know how to interpret it. The solution for this is quite simple. We just go back into here. In the response, we will define an object, and it will be data and then the body, right? So now make has a JSON object, and within that we have a key which then contains the buffer. Click Save Changes. Let's also then define our interface. So we'll just have one variable, will be data, document data, and then for the type, looking at the documentation, it will be buffer. So this binary buffer over here, type of buffer. All right. Document data. Click Save Changes. Again, let's now just refresh, see if it works. Let's run this module again. And just like that, we get our document data with the buffer code page binary. Fantastic. Now what we can do is upload it to, for example, a Google Drive. So let's actually make this dynamic. So we're creating the workflow session with data. We are then passing the session ID. After that, we'll get two bundles for the two documents. We'll pass their download URLs into this module, download the document. And after that, we're gonna upload it to Google Drive. So upload a file. Let's just upload it to the base. We won't really be able to map it because this one doesn't really give us the file name. So the file name will be the name that we get from list documents from the existing session, and then the data will be the document data over here. Just click Save and run it, just to check there is nothing in my drive at the moment. Click Run once. Alright, we're getting the two documents over here, and as you can see, it's running twice, getting the document data, uploading it over here. Fantastic. We have our PDF, and then we have our docx as well. Let's try downloading it to make sure it all looks fine. Okay, seems to be that we're getting some kind of error. Let's try yes. Let me investigate why we may be getting this error, and I'll be back in just a second. I think I may have found the issue here, and it is the fact that if we look at the first operation which downloaded the docx, the document data is formatted as a long string instead of the binary, so that may be creating the issue. So let's move these documents to trash and try to do the following. So in the download the documents module, in the interface, I'll put the code page binary to our data parameter over here, output parameter, and let's see if this fixes the issue. Unfortunately, that still didn't help. I tried inspecting the request that actually made by make, and so, for example, when we're downloading the PDF file, in the response body, we get a nicely formatted buffer of binary. Meanwhile, for Word, the situation looks different, as you can see. I've also tried testing downloading a file from Google Drive, like a properly formatted Word file, and in the response body, we are getting a buffer. So it may be just that the formatting of the data comes in differently from the API of Gavel. So for that, I'll have to contact their support team, and I'll let you know the progress in the comments to this video. But for now, at least the PDF is working. We'll figure out what to do with docx. Meanwhile, another improvement that we can actually make is, as you can see now, when we are downloading the documents, the only thing that is coming through is just the data, but not the file name, which means that in other modules, such for example uploading a file, we need to manually map the name and then the data, and then the data of the file. That is because obviously, when we download it here, the only thing we get in is the document data. How can we make sure that we also get in the file name? Actually, if we inspect the response that is coming back from the server, so let's try run this again and download in the documents. When, for example, this PDF file is downloaded, obviously the file name is also in the URL, but in the response headers, we also get this content disposition, attachment, and then the file name, and we have the full file name. So what we can use is we can actually use this header to populate the output of our module, so it has both the file name and the actual file data, which will then be easily mapped to other modules. So let's go ahead and do that. In the output, we'll have the data for which will be our body, and then we'll have the name. Let's actually call it file name and then file data. And the file name will be our headers. The name of the header is content disposition. And this won't work because we have the dash here. So we actually could try doing this. So headers, content disposition, and we need to add this. And the other thing that we need to do is obviously now remove everything before the file name, and then just leave the actual file name. So let's do that as well. So we're going to use a split. We're going to split by file name equals, and so similar to what we did here, this will give us an array with two items, one being everything before file name equals and then everything after. I think the only issue we may have here is that it will also have quotes, but let's actually see exactly what we get by trying it out and running it. So split, headers, and then double brackets, click Save Changes, and let's try running it again. Obviously the interface has now changed, so we'll update it just after we confirm that everything is working fine. Let's just use our PDF download link here. See if this works. Okay, as the output we get the file data and then the file name with quotes. So let's then also remove the quotes. So replace. and we're gonna need to replace the double quotes, but for that we'll need to escape it, because obviously you have double quotes here as well. Click Save Changes, and we're gonna replace it with just an empty string. So click Save Changes. Let's try running it again. And as you can see, we now get the proper file name and the file data. The one thing that we can do now is, looking at the documentation of the buffer, we can do something like this, which will let make know that it is data for a single file. So this will be, okay, let's actually keep it as name and data. This will be file name, and this will be buffer data. Click Save Changes. The only thing we need to do now is just update this to name and data as well. I think that makes more sense. Let's now refresh and see if it works. Okay, let's run this. Okay, perfect. We get the data and the name. And if we now open up the upload a file Google Drive module, instead of having to map it here, we can just select this file over here, Gavel download the document, and let's make sure our folder is empty. Let's try running this, see if it works. And as you can see, we have the file here with the correct file name and an easy to use user interface. Again, I'll contact the Gavel support to understand what's going on with the docx data, and we'll update you in the comments. And we can now move to the next section. Now the next step is implementing webhooks. Webhooks are not documented in the API documentation, unfortunately, but I know that they're available because if we go to the settings of the form, integrations, we can define them here. So we'll define them by a bit of trial and error. I have gone ahead and went to the webhooks tab inside of the app builder. Let's call it workflow completed. It will be a dedicated URL address. You can check out the difference between the two in the documentation, but 90% of the time it will be dedicated URL address. Connection will be the API key. And in here, we'll be able to define a few things. First of all, an attach and detach or update procedures. So sometimes the API actually provides you with the ability to programmatically create the webhook so that the user doesn't have to define anything in the UI. For this, you'll use the attach to create it, detach to delete it, and then update to update it. And then obviously you can make use of parameters. In our case, that's not really the case because we don't have any API documentation for actually creating those webhooks. So the user will need to define them manually, right? The make will provide a URL address, and the user will then need to create it in the UI. So not much configuration that we actually need to do here. Just click Save Changes, will be output in the full body that we get from the webhook. Now, apart from defining it here, we also need to define a module. The module will be an instant trigger. The webhook will be this workflow completed. Let's call it as well workflow completed. Actually, considering that we're calling it a session, workflow session with data, I think it actually makes sense to call it workflow session completed instead, just for more clarity. Again, create a new module, instant trigger, and let's call it the same, workflow session completed. Triggers when a workflow session is completed, i.e. the form has been fully filled out and submitted. note, you'll need to manually register the webhook under workflow settings, I think it's called. Under workflow settings, integrations, webhooks. Click save. All right. In terms of the interface, we'll be able to define the actual data that we're getting from the server. In terms of communication, we don't have to define it in most of the cases. We can just keep it empty because we get everything directly, all the data directly coming from the webhook. So that's pretty much it. Let's go ahead and test it out. Let's add it to our workflow session completed. Create a webhook. The connection is the same. And now we get this URL over here, which then the user will need to copy address. Go into the settings, integrations, and then new webhook. So webhook name, let's call it make. Let's include the documents as well to see how that looks like. We can define also custom headers, for example, for like authentication, if you want to verify that the request is coming truly from Gavel. Click create. All right, so that's created. You can click OK, and we can listen to new data. Now, to actually trigger it, we can obviously do it through the UI, or we can use our previous module for creating workflow session with data. As you have seen, it's fully filled out. So let's run this and see if our webhook is triggered. Okay, the session has been created and we got some data as well from the webhook. Fantastic. So we have all of the data coming through. Actually, apparently it's repeated. So one is in this data JSON format. We have the workflow name, and then we have as well all the variables over here, and then we have the files as well. And for files, we get a zip apparently with the data, and I guess both of all the files, both files that we have defined. Okay, cool. So probably the best thing that we'll need to do here is to modify this data array, so properly formatted, or maybe probably modify this data array or work with these variables over here. Fetch actually from the server using this workflow name, fetch from the server the configuration so we can actually properly label all of these fields. I think will provide a better user experience. And then obviously as well set up the interface for the files over here. And just before we continue, a quick life hack for inspecting the data that's coming into your webhook, the raw data that's coming from the service. If you go into webhooks, once you have already defined it, into webhooks over here and then select the webhook, you'll be able to see the logs. And inside the logs for the last 3 days, you'll see all the information that's coming through with all the headers and the full body. So for example, here we have just information that we've seen just a second ago. And what I have gone ahead and done behind the scenes is I have set up a few changes to our webhook and to our module. So let's see what changes those are and how they affect how the module appears for the user. So first of all, on the webhook, instead of passing all the information that we get directly from the service, as you see, there is some duplication in terms of just like the variable names. and then obviously this, this data object. And same in terms of files, we actually get like one file and then another files key with more with the same data. We don't really want to be passing that, not to confuse the user. So what I've gone ahead and done is I'm passing now the workflow name to our module. So it's essentially the setup on the webhook. This information is then passed to the module, and then on the module we can set up the interface and how to display it exactly to the user. We're passing the workflow name. We are then also passing the data, this key over here, which contains within it all of the different variables. And so that means we don't really need to be parsing all of this other stuff. And then in files, I'm passing an object with the name of the file and then the data of the file, considering that's the only things that we'll actually need to set up our module to work properly, so that the user as well can select the file in later modules to be uploaded, for example, to Google Drive. We won't really need any other data, such as, for example, the meme type or this extra files array, right? So what these changes ensure is that we get the full information from the webhook, but only this is what we are passing directly to the module. And then in terms of the setup of the module, communication as well stays empty, nothing has changed here. But I have just modified the interface to properly display this data. So first of all, workflow name, having a friendly label, data as well for all the data that we get from the server, and that will be an array of objects. And also then the files, which will be collection, and the label is files compressed in a zip. The users will understand how that's handled. And then within it we have two fields, the name and then the buffer with the data. And so as well they have this extra semantic key, file name and file data, so that later modules can be easily pre-filled with this information without having to manually map the name and the data. In terms of actually displaying the variables that we receive from the server, so instead of having just, for example, drop-down queue, have an actual user-friendly label. This would only be possible, and I've confirmed this with the support team, this will only be possible in case we hard-code the value for the workflow, right? So for example, when the user sets up the webhook, we can ask for the name of the workflow that they want to set up it with. And at that point in the interface, we'll be able to call an RPC. So for example, RPC list workflow variables, and then pre-fill all this information. If this information is dynamic, i.e., this webhook can be used for multiple workflows, we only know the workflow name once the data is received by the webhook, and at this point, it's too late to load it into the interface. The interface is loaded straight after the module is added, or like straight as soon as the execution starts, not after the data is already received, right? So unfortunately, we won't be able to do that if we want to permit the user to use a webhook for multiple workflows, which I think in this case is a better trade-off compared to only then having to restrict them to be able to use the webhook only with just one workflow, but then having the human readable labels. So this is the setup. Let's actually look, see how it looks in practice. So have added this webhook over here, workflow session completed, and then after it, added and upload a file, which as you can see directly maps to our previous module, as well as said before, without having to manually map it, because we have defined those semantic keys. And so let's actually test out and see what data we get. I will create a workflow session, and then straight after it's created, we should be able to see the data and the file being uploaded to Google Drive. So as you can see, this has happened. We have the workflow name, we have all the data with all the information. The only issue as well that I have seen here is that the multi-select for some reason is not being passed through, even so it's properly filled out in the form. That's something as well I'll contact the support team of Gavel to investigate. And also another small issue is with second level repeated items, we also get some, apart from just like the elements themselves, here, we also get some more extra information, which I guess is also some issue with the API, which I'll also address with them. And we get the files, right? We get the files with the name and then the data compressed in a zip, which is then uploaded to Google Drive. And if we go to the Google Drive, we can open it up. We'll see that we have our docx and PDF. Both of these work fine. I have already tested them. So then the user can either unzip it directly in actually in Make workflow, or just send it, the zip file somewhere to another system. So we have webhooks set up. A few small issues that we need to fix with the support team, but apart from that, we have pretty much finished the implementation of this app. The only next steps would be doing some more testing, fixing some of those minor issues that are left, and then after that, either going for the approval route, in which case, this app will be available to all the users and will pass through a thorough technical review as well by the Make team, or opting for the app marketplace, or what's called the community apps, for which the process is much simpler. It's only business review, not an actual technical review performed by the Make team, and you'll then be able to list this app under the community apps as well, with all your information as a partner who developed the app. The process is quite simple. You just need to input some basic information about your company, about the support email, name of the app, description, etc., link to your app, the logos, and some disclaimers about, for example, how the data is processed. After that, first of all, before you do that, you also need to be signed up already as a partner for Make.com. Once that is done, you will be able to submit this form. The Make team will review it, and within a few weeks, you'll be able to get your app listed on the community apps marketplace, and either offer it free of charge, or actually be able to charge as well for users that want to install it on their scenarios. I hope that you have really enjoyed this series. The series has come to an end. I hope you have learned about the process of developing custom apps on Make. If you have any questions, please do let me know in the comments or on my LinkedIn. And as well as promised, I will update the comments once I hear back from the support team about the Word document formatting to make sure that it also works in the app. Thank you for watching, and I hope you got some value out of this.